So Jillian and I go way back and our relationship has evolved. I'm going to start over. I'm going to stop it. Jillian, thanks for being here. You're actually the first person that I'm having on for the second time. So welcome back.
Woohoo! I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, your first podcast was very popular. It's actually one of our top downloaded podcasts. So it's so great to be having you back on the show. And yeah, so we're going to talk a lot about relationships, relationship with self, all of these really important topics. Um, so first, I want to ask you, Jillian, what do you think is most important in a relationship?
Huh. Let's just go right for the jugular. First question. I love it. Um, we're talking about an intimate relationship, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a lot of things that are really important. What's the most important part of it? It's a tough one to answer. But the first word that comes to my mind is respect.
Mm.
I think that, if it's very difficult to be a functioning adult in a relationship if you don't have respect for yourself. And then if you don't actually respect your partner and his or her journey and pain and wins and all of that, then it's impossible to have any sort of intimacy.
So respect is so important. I get that. But I think our standards for respect, and tell me what you think about this, have almost decreased with social media. Like people like will just say anything, more so, and just kind of like think that it's okay. I think cursing is more acceptable. So, I think we're almost living in a culture that respect, like if somebody didn't grow up and get the respect that they really needed, they're likely not to be in a relationship that has equal respect. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, as far as like the social media stuff, I mean, absolutely. I think that, when you talk about that, I think more also about boundaries. Boundaries are not just about what you allow into your space, but it's also how you are able to contain your own energy, right? And so when people are sort of like throwing things out there on social media a lot, it's they're actually violators of boundaries. They're kind of like too open. Versus being too porous and letting too many things come in. But you know, uh, you can grow up with not having a lot of respect from others and still learn how to be respectful and how to have respect for yourself and boundaries. It might be something that needs to be learned, but um, it has to be learned if you're going to be in a healthy relationship. I mean, again, you asked that first question. There's a lot of things that go into a great relationship. I mean, I think there's bad relationships, good relationships, and great relationships, extraordinary relationships. But I just think that respect is at the foundation. Like if you don't fundamentally um, respect someone, who they are, their boundaries, right? So that's a big one. And if you don't respect yourself and your boundaries, it's just really hard. And then this brings up topics of all sorts of things, including self-esteem.
hmm So let's talk about self-respect for a minute.
Okay.
So,
What is
what,
it?
yeah, essentially, like, what is it? And we disrespect ourselves in small ways, right? Like
Mhm.
by, I wouldn't even say it's small, but by the way that our self-talk is, for example. But
Sure.
then, like in really self-destructive ways through like addictions and bad habits. So that's like, we really need to start with ourselves. Is that part of what you're saying here?
Yeah, you have to start with yourself, and then you have to start with a question, and that is, what does it mean to be respectful of oneself? You have to actually define that. I think that there are some, universal principles to that, like you don't treat yourself like shit, basically. But I think that we really need to define and when I say we, each individual has to define, well, what does it look like to really show myself total and utter respect? Because for some people, it might mean saying no to more things. And for others, it might mean saying yes to more things. It really just depends on how you're living your life and what you need. My definition, or one of my definitions of self-respect, is honoring where you are and also giving yourself a little push to move forward and to grow. I think that's really great respect. So if we all need to grow, but to badger ourselves for not growing is not really respectful. And just to talk to yourself in a way that is mindful, really. And what is mindfulness is just being really aware of how what you say, the language you use, how you say it, the tone, the cadence, all of it, that you are aware that all of that has an impact. And so you're mindful of the fact that that has an impact. So therefore you choose what you say and how you say it carefully, because your intention is to have a positive impact as opposed to a negative impact.
Was there ever a time in your life that you felt like you weren't really respecting yourself?
Oh God. Yeah. I absolutely. I think that a lot of that comes, I think that gaining respect for yourself, at least for me, I can't really speak for a lot of people, although I will say that this is common in just my experience in working with people. It comes as we get older. I don't think that, the whole idea of being respectful is something that you sort of learn. There's a cultural learning, a societal learning from that. There's something that you learn in your family. And then there are just things that you learn along the way of what sort of feels good and what doesn't feel good. Every time that I've, lied to myself or did something that was like very much against my values, in that small way, I'm kind of disrespecting myself in that way. I've also been I've been in one really toxic relationship in my 20s, and I was disrespecting myself at that time. But this is such an interesting and layered topic, because when you disrespect yourself, it's coming from all sorts of things. It can be coming from low self-esteem. It could be coming from a grandiose self-esteem.
Mhm.
It can be coming from a lack of boundaries and all of that. And so it's just an interesting, what an interesting thing to think about, like what it is really to respect yourself, what it means to respect someone else. And it just keeps coming back to me for this practice of just total mindfulness. I don't think we really mean to disrespect ourselves. I
Yeah.
don't think we
Yeah,
go
I agree.
that.
Yeah, because it doesn't really feel good, right? When we disrespect ourselves. And it doesn't feel good if we're disrespectful to someone else.
Feels terrible.
Yeah.
Or when someone's disrespectful to us, it feels really awful.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a big one, because when I kind of go down my relationship history and all the couples and people that I've worked with, fundamentally, when someone doesn't feel respected, there's like it creates a tremendous block. It's like it's like until that can really be worked through, it's very little can be moved forward.
Yeah. It's complicated, Jillian.
It is layered and complicated.
Yeah, because we have different rules, right? Like my rules about what it means to respect me might be different from your rules,
Absolutely.
right? So
Absolutely.
so it's also, it sounds like, being open to even have the dialogue of like, what does it mean to even respect you?
Yeah.
Right? Like, where are you? Like, if you're in a partnership, where are you on the map?
I think that's great that you brought that up, because that's a great conversation to have with someone who you are. Don't wait until you're already like in a full-fledged partnership. Like, start having the conversation as you're kind of building something together, because then, and that's a really great conversation to have with someone, because it conveys what your boundaries are.
Mm-hmm.
And have that conversation with yourself, because in that moment you reveal to yourself, or you convey to yourself, what your boundaries are in life.
Now, how closely do you think respect is to, let's say, settling? Because when I think about respecting myself, sometimes I think about like am I settling here? Does that make sense?
Yeah. What context are you talking about? Are you talking about love, relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I think
I mean,
with
like for a
myself,
single
like,
person?
yeah, well, something that I've been doing recently is just kind of noticing something I've been trying to be more mindful of is like, where are my standards? Like, where am I missing the mark? Sort of like
Right.
subtle ways in which I'm settling. And to me, they're very closely related into respect, right? Like if I'm even just like throwing my clothes on the floor, like that's also like a low standard, but it's
Hmm.
also like I'm not really respecting myself or my clothes,
Right.
or my
Right.
environment, right? So there's
Right.
like you said, there's many layers to this, right? But I
Yeah.
was just curious because, I know that we both are big fans of Tony Robbins and his work. And one of the things that he talks about a lot is, to change your life, you got to change your standards, right?
Yes.
So, it's almost a standard, right? To like regard yourself with high respect and to regard else with high respect is also having a standard. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think it's a standard of living.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a standard of living. And again, I think you still have to ask yourself, like just to echo your point about the rules, you have to ask yourself, well, what does respect mean to me? Like, what
Mm-hmm.
does it mean? You have to share that with your partner. You have to share that, with yourself. And yeah, I do think that I think it's very important that people get super real with themselves about times in their life. And I'm going to just bring this, they can address this, relate this to anything, but especially people when it comes to romantic relationships and sort of their sort of rendezvous anecdotes. It's super important that they have an honest conversations with themselves when they were disrespected and when they disrespected themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets really tricky because if you feel perpetually disrespected, you have to see, well, what's happening? What are my rules for being disrespected? And how do I stand up for myself? How do I show, this person that they need to respect me more?
Mm-hmm.
That's a really, um, that's a big part of standards. If you're feeling disrespected in your relationship, how do you have the conversation like, I feel disrespected and I demand respect? um, Maybe I should go into that a little bit of how
Yeah,
to have
sure.
a conversation. Yeah, because I'll start with what doesn't work. What doesn't work is, how dare you, I demand respect, you're an a-hole. um, this whole sort of like, I'm better than you are, this sort of like, I'm up here, you're down there, and how dare you? And that's a really crappy strategy, because you want to have a conversation even when someone is not treating you the way that you would have liked them to treat you. It's really important that when we have conversations, it's eye to eye, and it's not like you're not speaking to them from being lower than them or being higher than them. And when you demand respect in that way, then it's almost like a scolding parent, and that's not going to get you the respect that you want and nor you deserve. However, if your partner or someone is really disrespecting you and you feel disrespected, you have every right to demand respect, but the way that you say it has to be different. You have to say, in this moment, I don't feel like you were appreciating me or respecting me, and that is not okay. I do demand respect from you. I in order to be in this relationship, I demand that you show me this. It's really, really important to me. If not, I don't feel important. So
Mm-hmm.
that's very different than the other way of doing that. But someone with low self-esteem is not going to have that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Someone with low self-esteem is either just going to take it, or they're going to get really, really angry and then have the outburst where they puts them on a higher level of significance, and their esteem is more like grandiose. But someone with really good boundaries, and this takes practice, someone with really good boundaries, someone with the clarity within themselves, someone who wants to meet their partner eye to eye, is going to say, this is exactly what I need. I won't tolerate any less, but this is how it is.
Yeah. So I'm curious about someone out there that's listening to this,
Yeah.
and we all have had past relationships, and we all have present relationships, and then we all will have future relationships, right? So there's changes that we can make now that can improve our relationships.
Oh
But
God, yes. Single people, listen up. Yeah.
but let's say somebody's listening to this and they're like, either one, recognizing that they're not being respected.
Mhm.
Two, I'm asking you a really loaded question, Jillian.
Okay,
Two,
I'm gonna get
so
ready.
either they're recognizing that they're not being respected,
Mhm.
or they're realizing, oh, I was in this relationship, I was in this abusive relationship, emotionally, physically, historically, where I wasn't respected. What can somebody really do to build their self-esteem if they feel like, I don't even know where to start? Where do I start?
Okay. So, great question. I think, and I see this in men and women alike, but low self-esteem, I see a little bit more in women in relationships than I do in men, just a little bit more. And what I would say to that is, so if whether you're in a relationship or you're single and you have low self-esteem, you have to address that immediately, because it's very difficult to have intimacy when your self-esteem is low. Because if you're in a relationship, then it's like then you're worried, or you're grasping, or you're too attached, or you're living in a shame state, and it's like you're stuck in a narrative and a story that's making it like virtually impossible for you to connect. And if you're single and you know that that's sort of your thing, you know that you struggle with low self-esteem, if you search for a partner thinking in the back of your mind that this person is actually going to be the boost in esteem that you need, I would say stop immediately. That's one of the worst things you can do, because they won't boost your self-esteem. What happens in the beginning of a relationship is that what's boosted is your ego.
Mhm.
And, there's nothing wrong with that. But no one can actually really, I mean, someone can help you grow and become more in love with yourself. I really do believe that, through someone's love and support, but you got to start to work on that beforehand. And I have to say, as someone who I always considered myself to have a healthy level of confidence. And I think that my friends and my community and colleagues would agree with that. But in relationships, it just, I can see where low self-esteem, low self-worth definitely crept in. I mean, it just did. And after my last relationship, which was a marriage and divorce, like that was really the number one thing that I had to come to terms with, is that I just didn't have a level of worth. I mean, I wouldn't say that it was like really, really bad, but it wasn't where it needed to be. It just wasn't. And I had to come to that truth. I think the fastest way to build your self-esteem is to commit yourself to growing and to doing things that make you feel alive, and to starting the thing that you never thought that you would start, the things that you procrastinate on, to actually take action. I think taking action is one of the biggest self-esteem, self-worth builders of all time.
Mm. Yeah, we can get so much in our head, like thinking, and sometimes even thinking that we're getting somewhere because we're thinking so much, but we're
Yeah,
not really in action.
not actually doing anything.
Yeah.
And it's so important to be constantly working on yourself. I mean, look, self-esteem can temporarily lower a lot when your energy is down, when you're not really tending to the things that create a little bit of magic in your life. Like this is our job. I mean, this, in my opinion, this is our whole purpose of life, and our job in life is to keep tending to what it is that makes us come alive,
Mm.
period. And you might need help with that. You might need a coach. You might need a whole team. But that is fundamentally what builds your self-esteem.
Hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that, Jillian. I love that answer because I can see from my own life, right, where like I kind of was on this path that wasn't really going so well. And once I started really listening to my heart, as
Yeah.
cliche and as it sounds, but it's a listening skill. And I do think that's very closely related to self-respect. And I started really honoring, like, what are those things that I really want, and really listening to those inner whispers, those inner callings, and starting to cultivate a life around, even, from a decision to, do I want to buy this jacket or not, to, I want to have my own business, like a bigger decision, to, what relationships are working for me and what aren't. Right. So I do think that I can see a really big difference in my life and my own personal happiness between, like, really listening to those things that light me up and shutting them down. And sometimes it can be subtle.
Super subtle. Yeah. Super, super subtle. And it's all like, it's all a process. It's all a process.
Like, there's no ending.
There really is no ending. I think you can
Yeah.
have moments where you coast.
Yeah.
And just sort of enjoying. And then there's moments where you're just like, actually the human nervous system is meant for intense amount of work and then rest, and then intense amount of work and then rest. There's so much data now to support that, as opposed to just the slow and steady and doing it all the time. I think people really thrive with that. So when you're single or you're in a relationship, like, you cannot stop working on yourself. And that means just understanding yourself, having more clarity about what's really important to you, exploring the things that you really want to explore, having that dialogue all the time. When a couple has a habit of regularly discussing their dreams with one another, that is a fantastic habit.
Yeah. Yeah. And even you can even do that with yourself.
Oh, absolutely. You have to be having that dialogue all the time. But unfortunately, what I see in a lot of couples is that, it's really easy to be mindful when you're single. It's really easy to go to bed when you want to go to bed, wake up when you want to wake up. Like, I had this conversation with a client recently, and she was like, oh, I just thought I did so much work on myself, that I was like at my highest self when I met him. And then here we are, and I realize I have so much more work to do. And I'm like, that's exactly what intimate relationship is meant to show you. It's literally meant to put a mirror in front of your face and say, good job, but there's more to do.
I'm laughing because it's so true.
Yeah. And I think that the modern relationship, like the evolved relationship, which I think is where we're all sort of heading, sort of culturally, to what we want. We just can't deny that there's sort of like a movement towards this. The evolved relationship are two people who understand that in themselves, they understand that in their partner, and then they talk about that. And then they decide. It's almost like a contract. Like, if you think of like what marriage being a contract, I think the real marriage or partnership or relationship contract should be like, we're going to have each other's back while we do this. Period.
And this, you mean like inner work? Inner work.
But you can't force someone to do the inner work. But an evolved relationship are two people who come in and say, you know what you trigger in me is something that I have to look into, and vice versa. And I'm going to do the work that's necessary. And then the second part of the contract is, let's support each other in doing the work. You got those two things, you're setting yourself up for major success. But a lot of people, they either don't want to do the work, or they are absolutely they just refuse to support the other person in doing the work.
And there sometimes can be some denial in there, right? Like,
it's not usually like, I just don't want to help the person. It's all ego stuff, and like, denial. I don't need to help. Like, he has to do more of the work than I do. That's a really common story. They think the other person has to do the work while they just sit back and either receive the benefits or not. That's a really common story.
I'm just going to add another layer to that from my own experience of like, okay, like, married, but then you have a child, and that adds a whole nother layer. But I think if you can, even my intention is to ultimately bring my child into like, the work with me, not from the perspective of like, you need to work on yourself, but I want to take him and show him, that meditation is an option, and, experience that with him through, attending meditation classes when he's 5. And, just, I want to integrate that into our family as something that, like, is a part of life, not from, like, we need to work on ourselves because there's something wrong, but there's always this opportunity for growth.
Yes. And that's beautiful. And that's a beautiful conversation to have with your husband. So when I talk about like discussing your dreams, you talk about certain things like, I really want to bring our son to meditation. And then you explain why and why it's so important. And you kind of share that with one another.
So what about single people, right?
Yeah.
Because there is so much emphasis in society about, like, partnership,
Hmm.
right? And then sometimes people can feel left out, or they can feel left behind, or they're not on this, like, kind of path that everybody else is. Sometimes I feel like it's like almost like this race, like, to keep up in society, and to do that, you got to be married, and, kind of the things that we're told, right? So single people can get really singled out, and feel like, okay, I've done the work, I went to the yoga, I've done the personal growth, or maybe they're, just starting out, but then it's like, okay, but, like, now what?
Right. Well, I mean, there's a lot of answers to that. So first of all, the whole societal pressure thing is more of an American thing. You don't really see that much in other cultures. In Europe, it's not quite the same. So I just wanted to mention that. So now what? I mean, it depends. If you're the person who's always on the dating app, take a break. If you're the person who would never go on it, maybe try it. Um, I I firmly believe that there's nothing wrong with being single. I also believe that it's totally normal and totally understandable and absolutely nothing wrong with being single and really wanting not to be single. And that's absolutely fine. For single people who want a relationship, just keep defining. Like, if you've not already defined what kind of relationship you want. And here's the thing, most people are picturing all the time of what kind of man or what kind of woman they want. It's like, especially if you're of a certain age, you kind of go down your dating history and you're like, okay, I don't want that. Or I want a little bit of this, and I want, a little bit of this mixed with this. I mean, that's like why dating experience is so important, because you get closer to what you want. But the real question that people should be asking is, who do I want to be? Who am I going to be in this relationship? What do I want to do differently? What am I bringing to the table that's something that I never brought before? What am I bringing to the table that is actually always been my greatest strength? How am I going to amplify that? And if you start to ask those questions, you change the game. And I would say that for people who are in relationship, it's never too late to be like, okay, well, who do I want to start to be in this relationship?
Mhm.
My whole focus is, you have to work on your own emotional strength, resilience, fitness all the time. If you want to, going back to respect, if you want to respect yourself, if you want to feel better in your skin, if you want to date better, if you want to get closer to the love that you want, if you want to create the intimacy that you want in your current relationship, everything we do is an inside job. Now, that's not to say you get self-obsessed and become narcissistic and all of that. You have to step out of yourself. One of the fastest way to build self-esteem and to get yourself there is to also service to others, just to get out of your head as much as possible. You said something about getting stuck in your head. One of my definitions for being self-respecting is to intervene as much as possible when I'm getting too stuck in my head and too stuck in me, my story, and this narcissism that really exists in all of us in some way. And, think about when you're around. I know what it's like to be around people I'm in love with, like in relationship with, and they're always in their head. It is when you do that, when you're always in your head and you're in relationship with someone else, you create such a wall between you and the other person, because there's no way that you can connect, because connecting comes from your body, it comes from your heart. you can connect your mind and intellectually, but you got to share it. So this whole idea of being inside of your head, it's like you and you and you, and there's no room for anything else. And it's like one of the biggest like diseases of attitude that's out there. And we have to learn to intervene that as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Kind
Yeah.
of went off on a tangent there,
Yeah,
but
that's okay. I'm
one.
going to go back a little bit, Jillian,
Yeah.
to, the like, what kind of person do I want to be? Right. Like, I once had this client, her parents were divorced, and she kind of came into the coaching being like, I never want to get married. Like, she kind of saw a bad relationship with her parents, and she had created this meaning of like, marriages are, they end and they're not so great. I don't really want to get married. And that was kind of where she was coming from. Right. And then we slowly untangled some of those meanings,
Yeah.
and I had her write down the list of qualities and characteristics she would want in a man. And then I invited her to start to integrate those qualities and characteristics into her own life. So really to be the things that she wants.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, that can be an exercise as well, right? Like,
oh, that's a great exercise. It's a great exercise. So one of the things that I'll sort of differentiate is, so that's a great exercise. Something that I help a lot of people, like single people, work through, for example, is, so you know what you want. Maybe you know what you want. Maybe even you've gone through that exercise of like, I want someone who's more aware or more this. It's like, okay, well, are you aware? I mean, like a lot of people will say, I want a better communicator. And it's like, okay, are you really a good communicator? Because just a giant newsflash, I don't believe that anybody I don't think there's anyone on the planet that doesn't need help with communication, because we were not schooled in this. And it's actually, there is an art to communication, and it has to be learned and refined and practiced. I'd love to get back to communication, but I want to, if we could, but I want to answer the question. I also help singles define what it is that they really need.
mm-hmm.
Because you could have a really beautifully glossy list of all the things that you want, and it could be super, super valid. But there might be certain things that you need because you have certain traumas in your life or certain wounds. And it just, the bottom line is that you might love a really gregarious partner and someone who's really out there and super social, because it kind of brings you out of your shell. So you might need that, or you might need someone. You might have to come to terms with the fact that really what's going to make you feel more safe in the relationship is someone who's a lot more grounded and present.
Mm-hmm.
So
good point.
These are the things that you have to really think about. And I think that the older we get more real about, okay, I know what's like really going to trigger me in a way that's not going to be, that's going to trigger every wound inside of me and make me feel fundamentally unsafe. So you have to come up with your non-negotiables with that.
Yeah. So what you're saying is making the distinction between what you want and what you really need.
And what you really need. And it's not that
sometimes you don't know.
And sometimes you don't know. And it's
Yeah.
not that they're opposite, and sometimes these are the conversations you have to start to have with yourself. Like, I need someone who's really patient, for example. That's not something that wouldn't necessarily be on my want list, even though I think patience is great. And virtuous and all of that. But I really, really need someone who's patient with me. Because I know, for example, particularly when it's someone who I'm in relationship with, if I sense that he's losing his patience with me, I start to feel very shameful and very anxious. Now, is there work that I could do about not being that way, not being triggered by that? Yeah, but I'm not suggesting that people go into this whole self-help masturbation. Like, you have to like also get super real with yourself and just be like, okay, yeah, but I know that's like, I've tried it. It does not work. So this is what I have to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think there's always like, you could go down that rabbit hole of like, oh, I have to fix, keep kind of trying to fix yourself. And at some point you just got to say like, this works better for me.
Yes.
And this is more what I need of.
Yeah. And this is a really interesting thing about self-esteem. First, I would say that no one is broken, so there's nothing to fix. There are things to improve, and that's it. I fundamentally believe that. And I think that one of the first steps, if you think you are broken, you are not ready for a relationship. You need to hire someone like a coach or a therapist so that you come to some sort of understanding that you are as important as any other person in the human being, any other human being on the planet. Because part of being in relationship with one another there has to be a fundamental understanding that we're all on the same playing field. And we live in a culture that idolizes, people for being famous and all of that. And my mom used to say, everyone takes a crap in the morning. So we really all are all the same. We all experience the same fears and the same doubts and all of that. And so there has to be a level playing field. Confidence does come somewhat with age. So yes, you can go into action and all of that. And I really think that being able to have the discernment between, this is something that I really need to work on. I'm not broken, but this is something that is unacceptable to me, versus, there's certain things that we're never going to be perfect. There's always going to be like shit that's like sort of unfinished business with ourselves. And when you can say, you know what, but this is who I am, this is really where I get super fearful. I work on it, but if you're having this conversation with a potential loved one, but I don't really see it totally ever going away. This is who I am. When you can say that to yourself, oh God, when you can start to resolve, I get so passionate about this because it's a big one for me and for so many people. When you can resolve the inner conflict in yourself of just like, you know what, I'm going to work on this, but I can no longer see this as this huge flaw. It's just part of my humanity. And I don't love it I don't like that it's there, but I accept myself and see myself on the same playing field as anyone else, even though I still have it. And that begins the dissolution of shame. And
thank
that
you for
comes
saying that.
yeah,
and there's so much in there. I want to thank you for
so much,
saying,
yeah.
a couple of things. One is, I just want to say, your confidence comes with age. I mean, it's like the things I used to worry about, like in my 20s, like, even just like about my body and relationships and like, the relationship between your body and relationships,
Mm-hmm.
those aren't things that I even think about anymore. And some of that is just because your comfort in who you are and yourself just grows, and, your body changes and your relationship with your body and changes, and, how that affects your relationship is a whole nother topic, but just, you get so much more comfortable in yourself. And I just want to go back to the last point that you made, because I recently had an experience with this where my husband and I were invited to share 3 things that we were grateful for one another.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, that I have a kind heart, or like a sweetheart or something like that, and something that he has been challenged by with me, I know for certain, because I also, while I do have that really sweetness and kindness and love and, passion, it also comes with kind of this like hot, feisty, direct passion as well, so there's a balance there. And and I know he would like me to soften a little bit more, and I can be really soft at times, and I also can be really, you know um direct, and this is who I am,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know if I'll ever be able to soften that part of me that is
Mm-hmm.
like that. And it's something that, I've worked on and I'll continue to work on, but it's also part of a piece of me that I'm going, I kind of have to accept that I have this kind of, feisty, direct quality about me. And that might change. It's gotten better, but it's probably something I'll work on forever. It's almost like a yoga pose. Like,
Right.
sometimes you can work on one yoga pose forever and, make some changes, but you're probably not going to master that pose.
No, right, exactly. I think with something like that, what you're talking to, it's not even about changing that or softening that part of yourself. I think you have to claim that part of yourself.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I
But
really was like, This is me.
Yes. But it's not you, it's part of you.
Right, right.
And I think that's an important distinction. And because it's part of you, that means that it can come out part-time.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be
Exactly.
all the time. And learning to discern when she's out and when the softer part and sweet heart is more forward is a little bit of an art to relationship, a lot. Relationship with self and relationship with a lover.
Mm-hmm. And even just like explaining to him that that's how I am, he can start to work with, okay, kind of feisty Anna's out, or, you know.
Oh God, I think that that's I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is a winning strategy when it comes to relationship. When you're like, okay, you've got a lot of personalities, like, okay, feisty Anna's out, like, let's duke it out. And then, like, because when we can shapeshift and and state shift and honor the different parts of ourselves, I think that that's super, super healthy and really important. We get so stuck in identity. I am this way. And then we stop ourselves from doing things in life that we want to do because it doesn't match our identity. When the reality is that we've got a few inside. And when we can start to honor all the different parts of ourselves and bring them into a whole, I mean, that really is what integrity is. Integrity comes from integration. And, bring it back to yoga poses. We want to expand, but we have to have an understanding of integration. And I think honoring all the parts of ourselves is the big process of that. So yeah, I think that's awesome. Feisty Anna is out, as opposed to just like fighting that. If you can do that, and the paradox is going to be that that's going to soften you. In that moment, you're going to start to laugh and like totally like, take yourself less seriously.
Yeah. And you're bringing up a really great point here also. And this is something that I've integrated into my language, right? Is a part of me, right? Because so often we can say like, I'm scared, right? Well, part of you is scared.
Yeah.
There's other parts that are there too, right? You can be part of you can be scared, a part of you can be excited, part of you can be curious. Yeah.
I think it's a game changer when your language shifts to I'm scared or I'm happy to I feel. Mm-hmm. I feel scared. I feel happy. Mm-hmm. Because there's a self-hypnosis that starts to happen when everything that we just say, I am, this, I am that, I am, all of that. And, I don't want to go down the whole yogic perspective wormhole, but
I love the yoga perspective, Jillian.
I know, but really we are like, I am that, like, that which is everything. So, and you are not just your name, and you are not just your identity. And it's important because we are at a time, I think we're at a very critical time in this country. I'm not speaking politically. I'm talking about people just with their stress levels. We have glamorized stress, and we've also convinced ourselves that we are stressed all the time. Oh, I'm stressed about this. I'm stressed about that. And it's become sort of like the cultural narrative as well as the individual narrative. And that is really, really divisive in relationships and relationship to yourself as well, because how you handle your stress is the most important determining factor to the quality of your life and your relationships. In fact, you could boil it down to the quality of your life is in direct proportion to how well you handle the stress in your life. Mm-hmm. And that includes the stress in your relationship.
Yeah. I want to kind of go off on a tangent a little bit, Jillian, onto this like cultural narrative. Some of this is because we've had our own conversations offline as well.
Yes.
Like, just kind of the overall sensitivity, right? Like, that that it's almost like people are afraid to say anything. And then when people say things, like people can take them so personally. I'm kind of going off on a tangent.
I know. Let's not even go into that wormhole, but yes. You know what? But the universal is always reflected in the couple as well. So
what do you mean?
So in other words, like, that kind of stuff you can see in a relationship as well. I mean, there
are
sensitivities,
you mean? Like,
yeah, and all sorts of sensitivities. I think that, there's some Well, we've talked a little bit about like these core I've, come up with these 10 core principles of relationship and what kind of needs to happen, things to follow that are so important. And, communication, right? Just to, talking about like the art of communication, and what's so important about communication is, number one, listen more than you speak. It's so simple.
Mm-hmm.
It's so simple, and yet it's so hard to do. And that doesn't mean sit there and be quiet and space out. Like, to listen means you have to be totally present and hear what the other person is saying and try to transcend your own reactivity in those moments. Oof, I mean, this is like evolving, like this is like growth, like this is like AP courses. Like AP calculus. This is like the AP of evolving. And the only reason why I bring it up is that this is the paradigm that we're working right now. People want to have super evolved relationships, and I always say, well, then you have to go way past your own personal paradigm of what your usual MO is in the world, in order to co-create the relationship you want.
So you bring up communication, and I once saw at a business, or heard at a business conference, Jeff Walker speaking, and one of the things that he was saying about business is that all problems are a copy problem. In other words, he said, all problems are communication problems. And it was just like, like,
Wow.
oh, like, like it all boils down to how are we communicating for the most part. Most problems are a problem in communication.
100%.
Yeah.
Problems. In fact, I would say that all problems are a breakdown of communication. Either communicating with yourself, communicating your needs, listening to the other person, all of that is a breakdown in communication. And we've been taught that if some people really think that they're great communicators because they're extremely articulate. And being articulate is very important for being a teacher or being a speaker, to be able to communicate what it is you're trying to say to others in a clear, hearable way, right? Articulation is a big part of it. But I know for myself, as being someone who's fairly articulate, like I brought that into relationships because I'm also a teacher, and it doesn't really work in like all the rules in the real world don't really apply in relationship world. Like relationship world has its own rules. It really does. And so I don't know, like, I mean, I'll just share 3 things off the bat, like 3 ways to just take your communication to the next level in your relationship. One is, so listen more than you speak. And that means listen to understand rather than to listen to reply, which is a famous Stephen Covey quotation from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I would say that if you really want to become a better communicator, to pick up that book and read it. So to really listen and hear and to be present, and then to breathe in those moments where you feel like you're being attacked or blamed or anything like that. Number 2 is to understand that you don't just communicate with words, you're communicating with your body. So if you are in a romantic, intimate relationship with someone, that person is definitely aware of your energy, even if he or she doesn't think in terms of energy and they can't actually put that into words. There's an awareness there. We are animals first, and we feel people's tension. We feel people's joy sooner and faster before we actually hear the words. So you have to be really aware of the fact that when you're talking to someone, that you're turning. John Gottman, who's a relationship expert, he always says that to communicate effectively, you have to turn towards someone, and you can actually physically turn towards them and turn towards them with your eyes and with the expression of your face. When someone feels like you're really present for them when you speak to them, it's huge.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing when it comes to artful communication is to not always say I feel in the beginning. So a lot of people will say, in an effort to be better at communicating, well, I just feel that when you do this, this happens. Just because you use the word feel, you have to be very, very aware of the fact that just because you say I feel this, you're not actually saying what you feel. You're giving judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And people use the word feel as sort of like this thing that, like, if you say it, I'm talking about my feelings and you can't take my feelings away from me. No, what you can say instead is, I really felt hurt during that time. This was my experience of what went down. I'm curious as to what your intention was. When you are in love with someone and someone is in love with you, you can absolutely tell them that something that they said was not okay, that their behavior was not okay. But if you tell them that they are a bad person, if you actually project your worst perception of them in that moment because of a behavior they don't like, then you're going to create a war. You can say, I love you. I'm hoping that your intention was better. I'm curious to hear what your intention was when you said that. I just want you to know that the way that you said it, or the way you didn't say it, sometimes is what we didn't say, or what you did really, really hurt me. I want to know what you meant, and I want to have a dialogue about it.
So just to take it, a step further, is something I'm personally working on.
Yes.
Is to communicate the vulnerable emotion. I think
Yeah.
that's also what you're kind of saying here, right? Not just be like, I feel like mad, but like, what's the like vulnerable?
Such a good question, Anna. So one of my core relationship principles is vulnerability. And I have to say, even though women are way more encouraged to be vulnerable than men are,
Mm-hmm.
we don't do such a great job at it because, culturally speaking, vulnerability has been seen as weakness. And as women are trying to, as we're trying to kind of prove ourselves to be just as strong as men, we're sort of abandoning probably the most fundamental human right and human gift is our vulnerability. And so it's not just like, you did this wrong, right? We want to move away from being the scolding parent. And and if you're the person who's always crying and always wounded, you want to start to rise up a little bit, right? It's all about getting to the center line, your center line, and being able to say, wow, that really that brought up so much fear for me. I'm like, now I'm afraid that when you do that you're going to leave me. Like, maybe that's crazy and that's irrational, but that's actually what I'm feeling right now. It's like, you're going to leave me. I'm going to be abandoned in that moment. Oh my God, if we could just have more conversations like that. It's so hard. And I do think that third parties are sometimes really necessary, but to say like what something means to you on a really deep and profound level is, we just take it to the next level in those moments.
So, question, Jillian, in terms of emotional fitness, I know that's something that you're an expert on. Just kind of like giving us an action step in terms of becoming more emotionally fit. As we start to wrap up here, can you give us like some like brief idea about like what emotional fitness is and how we can start to integrate this to have more meaningful relationships and more empowered relationships?
Sure. I want to begin with what emotional fitness is not. It's not don't feel your emotions. In fact, if you have a habit of stuffing your emotions, then you're not emotionally fit. I would say you're emotionally unfit. So it's not about not feeling your emotions. It's learning how to, well, first of all, emotions do three things. They either move through us like water, the way that they're meant to. They do two things. They either move through us through water like they're meant to, or they get stuck somewhere in our bodies. And for 100% of us, we all have emotions that are kind of stuck and that we're working through and all of that. So emotional fitness is not about being perfect, but emotional fitness is about being totally the journey of being self-aware. So there's 3 levels. You have to be super aware, then you have to take action, and you have to have insight into yourself. So the first step, like one action step that someone can take is, well, I'm going to name 2. One that's sort of like a little bit more, takes a little bit more effort, sort of like on the outside, and one that takes a little bit more effort on the inside. So the one that takes a little bit more effort on the inside is to write down what makes me come alive.
Can you say that again, Jillian?
Yeah, the first thing would be what makes me come alive. And if that language just doesn't resonate with you, then you can say what excites me, what makes me happy, and write it down. And commit yourself to making space for that in your life. Because joy and play and all of that are things that we deprive ourselves of too much, and they are the ticket to living more in your heart and not so much in your head. And so that's just like number 1, is to get that clarity and define that for yourself. And if you're in a relationship, you must know this about your partner. You must have that dialogue. Then second thing that I would do to become more emotionally fit is to begin your day. Like your morning has to be like how you begin your morning is so important. So you have to have the understanding that stress is going to happen.
Can you say that again? Because
stress is I know sorry about that. Stress is inevitable. Stress is going to happen. So you have to start your day each morning. I like to meditate. I like to read. I like to write. Even if I have a few minutes, I don't negotiate on that stuff. I like to do some exercise. You have to prime your nervous system to be able not experience stress, but so that when stress enters, you can respond to it in a way that is less reactive. We cannot, there's a lot of talk about reducing the stress in our lives. And yes, there are certain things that we can do, we can say no to make our plate less full. But the real question is not how you can reduce the stress in your life. Stress is not what happens to you. Stress is what happens inside of you. So it's about how you respond to it, how you integrate it into your body. That is what creates the problem, not so much what happens on the outside. So in the morning, if you can do something that kind of primes your nervous system, meditation, exercise, things that you do with your physiology, taking your time and taking care of yourself so that you can be more of a responder and less of a reactor.
Yeah.
It's a daily practice.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear that. I almost visualize, like, it's almost as if, like, for some reason I had this vision of like somebody hitting like a baseball at you, and instead of being like, I got to duck and like, oh my God, is it going to hit me? Like, you just kind of catch it.
And yes, that's a great metaphor. I love that.
I love that. I ask everyone this question, Jillian. What's the best advice you've ever been given?
Oh, I love that question. All right. I'm just going to take a moment. Okay. I think can I say 2 things? They're short. Okay.
Please.
So when it comes to like my own personal self-worth and when it comes to guys, the best advice I ever got from my mom was when I was younger, this happened more, and I would like a guy and get so crazy, like totally ungrounded about it. Meanwhile, I knew nothing about him. It was just like all in like very girly la la land ungroundedness. She would say, you have to picture him taking a crap in the morning.
That's very humbling.
I mean,
that evens the playing field right there.
Because my mom, because that was part of a larger thing that she would tell me. And that is that we are all, she didn't like to use the word equal because she said we're all different. So there's no such thing as equality because we're all so different, but no one is more special than anyone else. And that is just great advice, and the second piece of advice that she also gave me was, pull up your socks. And the metaphor was I understand that things are difficult, take some time, but you got to kind of pull up your socks, as she would say, and get your shit together and move forward.
Mm, awesome. I love that.
Those
Advice for,
socks and feces, man.
yeah, yeah.
Oh God. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Tell us how we can get in touch with you.
Yes. So, best way to get in touch with me. So my handle right now on Instagram is at Jilly, Jilly Turecki. Also my site, JillianTurecki.com. Uh, I have just a lot of great things in the works. One is, as you know, Emotional Fitness Monthly. I wanted to start a membership program for people who want to become more emotionally fit. They're sick and tired of not feeling as good as they could. And so I wanted to do something that was super affordable for people to join. It's the first ever of its platform. And so you can find that on my site through the membership program and on Facebook.
Yeah, yeah. Sign up for Emotional Fitness Monthly.
Yes,
Because
absolutely. And I have an online course all about that's in the works, and it's going to launch this September, about how to it's called Grit and Grace, and how to overcome like major crisis in your life. So, and that's something that I don't think that people it's something that I had to do. So I'm like laying down all the steps that need to be taken to not only overcome a crisis, but to literally turn out on the other side a renewed human being, to the point where you look back at that crisis and you see it and you understand its context in your life. So yeah.
awesome, Jillian. Thank you so much. It's always fun.
I have to say thank you. Your questions were amazing. And, it's just, the pleasure is all mine.
Oh, thank you, Jillian.
Thanks, Anna.